Why you wouldn't want to have Netanyahu in the dock is the risk that if he is proven guilty, damages the whole Israeli construct or the franchise, because if it's proven now, then retrospectively that opens up questions, and then it leads to more difficult conversations on, well, they don't want to give clearly the Palestinians, from the Israeli point of view, they don't want them to have a state. They've said that clearly, but then that opens up that discussion even more. So having...
You mean the current Israeli administration has expressed its opposition to a two-state solution. It's a bit more 100%, nuanced than your words allow, but I'm sorry to nitpick.
No, not at all. And I think even with international law, one thing I always get not confused but frustrated is that it is sometimes applied as a double standard, because Israel will say, oh, they're not adhering to international law, yet they're in the occupied territories, annexing land in the West Bank. So but you do need that rule of law. You need an independent panel that can go and give a fair adjudication of this happened.
And
they're not letting journalists in.
If any of these Hamas commanders were still alive, there were 3 against who warrants were sought, 1 has been issued, then exactly the same 100%. Standards would apply to them, which is where you start talking about conflation. It's where Robert Jenrick starts saying how you can't conflate Hamas terrorism with Israel's war of self-defense, apparently not understanding that what they stand accused of is not self-defense. What they stand accused of is a complete contempt for the notion of self-defense by using starvation as a weapon and by targeting civilians. And if they didn't do it, it would be easy to prove, or at least it would be would be helpful for them to be given an opportunity to prove it, at which point, of course, we remind ourselves that it's been almost impossible for international organisations and international media outside Gaza to determine exactly what has happened, because Israel won't let them in.
They won't let them in. They won't allow an independent party to evaluate the facts and make as balanced as possible opinions. They just won't allow that. That itself, to the people, the corpus of people who don't want to see this happen, the gut feeling is that, if there's something uncovered and our guy's in the dock and this goes the wrong way, then our whole enterprise is damaged.
I'm a rabbi, and when I heard the subject, what came to my mind was a letter that I and 31 other rabbis, progressive rabbis, I have to admit, I think apart from one of them, signed in the Sunday Times in August, when the President of the Board of Deputies protested about the possibility of the ICC holding Netanyahu to account. The 31 rabbis, including myself, wrote against the President of the Board of Deputies, upholding international law and saying that it is only international law which we have to respect, and which was, in fact, after the Holocaust, it was Jewish jurists who particularly, like René Cassin, instituted it. They were very much a part of it. So we were entirely in favour that this is the right way to proceed.
I remember that letter, actually, from August of last year, and I fear it's another example of something that hasn't received anything like the level of coverage that would have been afforded to something or someone or supportive of, more supportive of Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't know. I appreciate you haven't heard the whole programme, so feel free to decline the invitation to answer any other questions. But what do you think has happened over the course of the last year, Jeffrey? How has Israel found itself or been led by Netanyahu into this sort of situation?
I've been involved with Israel-Palestinian work since 1967. I co-chaired the Jewish Youth Emergency Committee when we feared that Israel was going to be wiped off the map.
Yes.
And it was an extremely emotional time. But from that point on, in fact, we were in touch with Consul General of Israel and went to him immediately after the Six-Day War. We had 3 huge warehouses full of blankets, medical equipment, tents, and we said, we need to distribute this now to the refugees who are not Jewish refugees, but who are Palestinian refugees. And he said, I think that's a really good idea. Come back tomorrow. I'll telegram Jerusalem. It was in the days of no internet. And we came back the next day, and he said, well, I'm really sorry, but the government feels that it would be a sign that we felt guilty if we were to accept that offer.
Gosh.
From that point on, I knew that I was a rabbi and not a politician. And I've been absolutely clear that the occupation is illegal. I'm horrified about what's happening at the moment. Many of my colleagues, I'm 83, so I recognise that I'm retired, and it's much easier for me than it is for a rabbi who is still trying to keep his community together, where some of them feel very much the pain, which is accurate, of Israelis who don't get the news that we get over here. It's very censored, what they're able to see. They have to watch Al Jazeera, and I have a close colleague who's a rabbi in Israel who I talk to, so I know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
They watch Al Jazeera to know what's going on. I think that recognition of the horror of what took place on October the 7th and the recognition of the fear that has been evoked once again in the Jewish community that instead of never again, again is happening.
Yes.
And the Jewish community just feels it. It's in our bones. We're a traumatized people.
And Netanyahu has exploited that perfectly natural response.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A great big Tesco lorry. I thought I was in a quiet place as the lorry's just coming past. Maybe I can hide.
Well, in a way, Jeffrey, it's a reminder of the success of the diaspora, that enormous Tesco lorry, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I compare the size of it is probably the size of the humanitarian trucks which are not being allowed by the Israelis to go into Gaza.
Good Lord.
It's huge. It is absolutely huge. And it helps me to recognise the pain, the suffering. This last week I was in a meeting with Dr. Victoria Rose, a British plastic surgeon who's been over twice to Gaza, who you could get on your programme to describe the horror that she's seen there.
I'm so glad you were listening today, albeit belatedly, and I'm so grateful to you because you've articulated quite perfectly how difficult this is for somebody in your position and how much more difficult it would be if you still had a congregation, if you weren't retired. I wonder if you could help my listeners just with one final thing and just explain what you mean when you use the word progressive to describe yourself and most of the other signatories of that letter last year.
Yes, I think I can do it relatively truthfully and easily. Traditional rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, of whom the majority rabbis in Israel are Orthodox, believe that the Bible, the 5 books of Moses particularly, were given by God word by word, apart from a few little question marks raised by a 14th century Rabbi Ibn Ezra. The progressive rabbis believe that it is the best seeking by human beings, very wise, very spiritual, but the words were written down by human beings, and therefore they're not sacrosanct in the same way. We're not fundamentalists, and therefore we have to question, and we have to be open to the realities of the world in which we live.
You're right. That is a fairly helpful explanation. Jeffrey, thank you.
Well, thank you, and I'd love to speak to you again. I admire you enormously.
Well, that's incredibly kind of you, thank you. And we will definitely talk again, and I will try and get Victoria Rose onto the programme as well.
I spent 10 years at the court, so I'd like to caveat everything by saying it's an organisation of fantastic people from all around the world.
What were you doing there?
I worked in the registry running the evidence management department, so picking up anything digital forensics and any devices that anybody being arrested would have. And my opinion is it was always criticized as being a court of Africa, that it only focused on certain countries. And the irony was, whenever we tried to not do that, this type of thing happened. Knockback from the West, from the signatories of the court, and it was easy when it was the US doing it, but now it's my own country, the UK, basically saying that, or not committing to arresting Netanyahu, as you said there.
Well, that's Yvette Cooper this morning claiming, I think somewhat unhelpfully and unimpressively, that she doesn't think it's her decision to make. But Sir Keir Starmer has backed the International Criminal Court on this. So even the Telegraph front page says Starmer supports arrest of Netanyahu. But what it doesn't address, and what he hasn't really been asked yet, is whether he'd be prepared to essentially do it himself.
Right.
Put your trousers on your neck, sort of thing, from Sir Keir Starmer.
Exactly, and I'd love to see that day. So I think the answer to why wouldn't you want to see a day in court, I think Netanyahu doesn't respect this court. This justice isn't for him. This justice is for African countries or those that commit war crimes. This is not a war crime in his opinion. So why should he answer to this? And that's fine. That can be his opinion. But the other countries, the UK specifically, should say, no, you have to answer the court. You've been asked to answer this and have justice.
And who is going to be clearer on that question than a former director of public prosecutions and international human rights lawyer?
Mm-hmm.
You would hope, wouldn't you?
You would.
We'll see. I mean, it is moot, I suspect, and as I suggested earlier, in the absence of a sort of emergency diversion while he's flying to visit an ally. I can't quite imagine him seeking to set foot in this country any more than Vladimir Putin would, while an international arrest warrant is in place against him. But my goodness me, it's your perspective on this as someone that has worked there. How do you address the idea, which we will hear, that he wouldn't get a fair trial?
He would get the level of justice that the court has been set up to give, and in my opinion, that was extremely high. The other criticism they get is that the cases take too long. I worked there for 10 years, and one of the cases lasted for 10 years. I was there the same time as that person. So, is that fair that it takes so much of your time? Who knows? I can't answer to that. But
if it was you standing accused, then I think you struggle to argue that you don't want it to be as thorough as is humanly possible. That, of course, can sometimes seep into the sclerotic. Thank you, David.